300 years ago, Ogata Korin created what is now considered one of the greatest masterpieces of Japanese art. At first glance, it's a decorative marvel. Two trees stand on either side of a flowing river, their white and red blossoms unfurling against a gleaming gold background. But at the heart of the image is a visual puzzle. While the trees are more or less painted realistically, the water is created using a complex pattern of interlocking rings. Instinctually, we know that they represent water. But if so, was the river always this color? Or has time altered Korin's vision? We don't know the exact year when Korin painted this masterpiece, only that he painted it towards the end of his life. On one hand, it is a summation of his career, a monumental statement shaped by a quarter century of artistic refinement. Yet, from our perspective, this same work marks the beginning, a beacon that points towards modernism through its radical abstraction. To understand why Korin depicted this impossible scene, we must journey back, not just to the beginning of his career, but to the birth of his revolutionary way of seeing. Ogata Korin was born in 1658 into Kyoto's wealthy merchant class, a world where aesthetics weren't just appreciated, they were currency. His father, Ogata Soken, was no mere textile merchant, but also an accomplished calligrapher. The Ogata family didn't just sell beauty, they lived it. Korin was the second of three sons, which meant he would not inherit the family business. Born into a wealthy family, he received an education typical of men of his social stature, which included painting. Yet it was the theater, more than painting, that ignited Korin's passion. This love for the theater proved fortunate. Had he pursued painting in youth, he likely would have become a carbon copy of whichever painter he apprenticed under. When he later turned to painting out of necessity, Korin wasn't bogged down by allegiance to any teacher, and he could shed influences as quickly as he absorbed them. Life took a dramatic turn when Korin was 29. When Korin's father died in 1687, the family textile business collapsed under his older brother's mismanagement, and everyone had to tighten their obi. By Korin's 30th birthday, the wealth he'd been born into was already running out, but Korin still partied like it was 1699. A lifelong playboy, he fathered 4 illegitimate children with different women, doing his part to boost the blossoming adoption industry in early modern Japan. Child support drained his finances, and Korin was forced to sell his properties and pawn his possessions. For the first half of his life, Korin had done what wealthy people do when they need not work. He partied. And oh, was he the life of the party. Korin was a master of otogi, storytelling, which made him a sought-after guest at upper-class gatherings. He didn't realize it at the time, however, those connections to wealthy patrons would prove beneficial after those financially untroubled times screeched to a halt, and he desperately needed commissions to pay the bills. Korin the storyteller possessed that rare gift, the ability to make others see what wasn't there. Like painting, storytelling transports audiences into imagined worlds. In those days, storytelling and painting often went hand in hand. After reciting a story, the performer would improvise a painting. At one of those soirees, the host's wife was moved to commission a painting from him. She wasn't just anybody. She was the daughter of the previous emperor, which shows you what upper-class circles Korin moved in. Korin was accustomed to occasionally receiving gifts for his storytelling, but this was different. Now, at 37, for the first time in his life, he was paid for something that until then he had just done for fun. Korin was not only a remarkably late bloomer, but perhaps the only actor in history to achieve equal renown as a painter, a feat that is yet to be surpassed. Korin's given name was Ichinojo, a common name for boys in Kyoto merchant families. Nice name, but not one carrying any artistic or literary significance. Fortunately, changing your name back then didn't require standing in line all day at the local council. Korin's father, Ogata Soken, used a pseudonym, Kosai, when signing his calligraphy. You see, Korin's father didn't just deal in fine fabrics, he was a top-notch calligrapher. And if you're thinking, that is museum-level calligraphy, then you're right. Both of these are in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum in New York. After his father's death, around 1689, Korin changed his name and took the character Ko from his father's artistic name and added another, Rin, meaning gem, and Ogata Korin, as we know him now, was born. Nevertheless, launching a painting career so late into life and without the backing of a teacher meant that Korin had to build his brand from scratch. Paying homage to his father was a gesture of respect, but his new name lacked the prestige he desperately needed. He needed a name that would open doors, a name that, after the ink had dried, looked as if it were engraved, as if time itself had carved it. This is where it helps to have a famous ancestor in the family. Korin's great-granduncle was none other than Honami Koetsu. Most people, even Japanese, have forgotten him, but in Korin's time, having Koetsu as your relative was like being related to Goethe. Born exactly 100 years before Korin, Koetsu came from a family of sword polishers. Yes, that is an actual profession, and a noble one at that, but it is on account of his collaborations with the painter Tawahara Sotatsu, a name you are going to hear frequently, for which he is best remembered. Koetsu and Sotatsu worked together to produce marvelous works of art in which text, calligraphy, paper, and painting all merged. Like this hand scroll, painted with gold and silver paint, which unrolled stretches over 13 meters, about the length of a city bus. Sotatsu decorated the paper, Koetsu executed the stunning calligraphy. These works weren't meant to be seen all at once, but gradually revealed, like the unfolding of a story. If you've already noticed that Kosen, Korin, and Koetsu are all pretty close to each other in the phone book, then you're pretty sharp. Fast forward 3 years to 1692, and Korin now does something pretty bold. He starts writing his name using the Ko character from his famous great-granduncle. Korin the artist not only aligned himself to a formidable artistic pedigree, he now had a signature that would be recognized a mile away. Korin's painting career seems to have progressed quickly. That being said, when seen from a modern perspective, Korin's early paintings aren't that spectacular. It was a period of assimilation, but not of innovation. It's as if he's studying the market, figuring out what potential patrons wanted. He was selling paintings, but there was nothing that hinted at an imminent artistic breakthrough, until 1701. This year marked a major milestone for Korin, both for his painting as well as his brand. The career of the actor-painter got a huge boost when he received the honorary title Hokkyo. Hokkyo is a prestigious Buddhist rank normally awarded to monks, but also given to artists, particularly painters. It literally means bridge of the Dharma, suggesting a person who serves as a bridge to Buddhist teachings. This title was awarded to artists in acknowledgement of their accomplishments, kind of like a Knight of the Legion of Honor, but with a Buddhist twist. Receiving this award was usually the culmination of a lifetime of work. Korin had barely been painting a decade, so it's likely his friends in high places pulled a few strings. As he was not attached to any school of painting, it gave his reputation a huge boost, and afterwards, his commissions increased. "1701 was not just the year that Korin picks up a fancy title. Something else happens. Korin intuits something revolutionary. Turning his back on the visual overload practiced by his contemporaries, Korin discovers that painting less could be more powerful than filling the entire screen. Out of nowhere comes this, his first irises screen, a work which completely transcends anything he had done before. It's not just a stunning decoration, it's more like the backdrop to a film. There's so much in this screen to talk about, which is why I'll go into it more deeply in the next episode. For now, I'm just going to touch on one aspect as it relates to Korin the storyteller. Korin isn't just painting a garden of irises. He's depicting a scene from Ise Monogatari, the Tales of Ise, one that his cultured viewers would recognize. There's a chapter in Ise Monogatari where the travelers stop to rest near a river crossing and are struck by the beauty of the iris growing there. Korin removes the travelers from the scene and paints only the irises. So someone looking at the painting whose eyeballs work well, as the Japanese say, would instantly pick up on the reference. This connection with the literary reference pulls the viewer into the painting. This device for leaving the protagonist out of the painting is called Ruso Moyo. It's a unique Japanese aesthetic. The main subject is absent from the scene, leaving only traces that suggest their recent presence. It creates narrative through absence rather than presence, evoking feelings of longing or poetic emptiness. In other words, don't paint Romeo and Juliet. Show only the balcony. 1704, when a friend was assigned a government post in Edo, Korin made the move with him. Edo had exploded into the world's largest city with nearly 1 million inhabitants, 3 times larger than Kyoto. Thanks to an established network of art dealers, Korin's works had already attracted buyers there, making it an astute move to seek more lucrative commissions in the bustling capital. After 5 hard-working years, Korin returned to Kyoto, where he painted this pair of 6-panel screens depicting 2 groups of cranes. Like the irises screen, this looks unlike anything Korin had done before. For starters, there is a tremendous amount of empty space in the painting. I don't know any other folding screen that has completely unpainted panels. Then there's the mutant cranes. I say mutant because Korin combines traits from different Japanese cranes, black bodies, white heads, some red patches around the eyes, into a fanciful new species. I'm willing to bet my katana that Korin never saw these particular cranes with his own eyes, which might account for their stiffness. On the other hand, his audience hadn't seen real cranes face to face either, so his wonky depiction wouldn't have ruffled anyone's feathers. The screens are uncommonly symmetrical, almost a mirror image of each other, which is peculiar considering Korin studiously avoids symmetry everywhere in his works. Arranging the cranes in 2 nearly identical groups gives them this human-like quality, since it's rather odd to see cranes lined up like 2 football teams before the kickoff. Even though we are standing so close that we should be able to see every feather, every detail, Korin has eliminated all that. The cranes are more an amplification of Sotatsu's stencils, blown up on steroids. Korin is paving the way for postmodern aesthetics, simplifying the bird's forms into stylized rhythmic units, and in doing so, shifting the emphasis from representation to presentation. The same goes for the depiction of the water. There's something unusual about the way the water recedes to the outer corners of the screens, as if the tide is going out and the cranes are discussing the fish shortage. Putting aside the meaning of the water for a second, look at how Korin depicts the water using a simple pattern. Korin has devised his own signature design for depicting water, which he will recast in red and white plum blossoms, front and center in the main role. This is the furthest he has ever gone in abstractly depicting nature, creating such an iconic depiction of water that today, this pattern is referred to as Korin water. On a somber note, in both paintings, the water looks quite different now than when originally painted. What appears black and brown today should actually be black and silver. The silver foil Korin used has oxidized over time and lost its rich luster. When we think of Japan's iconic spring flowers, we first think of cherry blossoms, sakura. But before sakura season arrives, plum blossoms, ume, paint the country in shades of white, pink, and deep magenta, quietly appearing in late winter as the first heralds of spring. In Japanese culture, these delicate yet resilient flowers symbolize perseverance and renewal. White blossoms evoke elegance and serenity, while red blossoms suggest drama and boldness. They burst forth to herald winter's end, then disappear until another year passes and we experience their ephemeral beauty anew. Plum trees embody one of nature's most striking contrasts, twisted, weathered trunks that writhe like ancient dancers beneath an explosion of pink and white fireworks. Korin's trees capture this contrast perfectly, balancing gracefulness, ruggedness, and vitality. The young tree on the right seems poised to start moving, its trunk legs positioned slightly apart, branch arms outstretched, reaching up and leaning back. The tree on the left is the more mature tree, yet despite it being the older tree, there is a profusion of new shoots extending beyond the border of the painting. Its base looks more like a rock than a tree trunk. The tree bends so harshly that it swings out of the frame before reappearing, not from the side, but swooping down from above, implying that the entire tree must be several times larger than what the viewer can see. The exit and re-entry of movement is so convincing that we have no difficulty connecting the downward limb with the rest of the tree. Korin must have had intense concentration and stamina, considering the confidence of his brush. There are traces of outlines for the trunks indicating an underpainting, but for the thin branches, there is zero underpainting. They are executed as single strokes, drawn unhesitatingly across the gold foil. Whether plum blossoms, irises, or cranes, Korin renders them not as they appear in nature, but as they live in memory and imagination. It is neither realism nor complete abstraction. It's a combination of both. He isolates each subject from its naturalistic context, distilling away everything non-essential. Korin's masterful approach draws from a distinctly Japanese aesthetic principle. Isolating subjects against gold backgrounds isn't just pretty, the psychology behind it is brilliant. Gold leaf eliminates all spatial context, forcing us to see an object as pure form, rather than part of the landscape. This strategic removal works like magic. Without competing vegetation or atmospheric perspective cluttering the composition, we focus intensely on what matters most. The delicate stamens and creeping lichen, which would otherwise disappear into background noise in a realistic painting, capture and hold our attention. Great art doesn't copy nature, it teaches us how to read it. Our brains excel at making sense of the impossible, so we might not even register that while we are viewing the trees from ground level, the river spreads below us from our bird's eye view. Proportion and perspective are no longer intertwined, they are freed from their shackles. And unless you're a botanist, you won't question Korin's sleight of hand. He hasn't just eliminated the ground, he's transplanted these plum trees entirely, since the last place plum trees grow is besides rivers. Tarashikomi is a word worth learning how to pronounce, as it figures quite prominently in Korin's output. Tarashikomi involves adding ink directly to a wet painting surface. Adding more water to the paint makes the pigment more transparent, allowing more of the paper or gold leaf to shine through. It's great for suggesting light or texture, as here on the tree trunks. The master of this technique was, you guessed it, Sotatsu. I wasn't kidding when I said that's a name we're going to hear a lot of. Sotatsu was an absolute magician with a brush in his hand, and his influence on Korin's approach to Tarashikomi is unmistakable. Sotatsu had also painted a pair of screens with cranes. Notice how Sotatsu gives the impression of layers of tail feathers, not by painting them individually, rather letting the pigment cluster and disperse at random. It's a different approach from Western painters, who use highlights and shadows to give the impression of volume. Sotatsu suggests three dimensions, just as Korin does in sculpting the trunks of the plum trees. But Tarashikomi is more than just a device for obtaining striking visual effects. It's the polar opposite of conventional painting because the artist is literally painting with water. Both the coursing river and the organic tree trunks are created with this water-based technique, which gives them a shared fluidity. For the water, this makes perfect sense, but for the solid trees, it heightens their living, breathing quality. Everything flows, nothing is rigidly fixed. The essence of the trees remains as fluid as the water that nourishes them. Most of Korin's folding screens are 6-panel pairs. He also created a handful of 2-panel pairs, a format most artists avoided, except notably Sotatsu, which perhaps explains Korin's attraction to it. Korin liked this painting by Sotatsu so much that in 1710, soon after resettling in Kyoto, he made a copy of it. It depicts the gods of wind and thunder. Fujin, the wind god on the right, holds a sheet, and Raijin, the thunder god on the left, swings his noisemaker. Notice how the wind god is slightly cropped so that it gives the impression of his running towards the thunder god. And what about all that empty space in the middle? Are you thinking what I'm thinking? On 6-panel screens, the visible hinges between panels create natural divisions that help viewers organize narrative space, just as the folds in a map help you in trying to find your destination. But that doesn't mean the same painting works across both formats. In conceiving a folding screen painting, the artist considers the number of panels appropriate for the composition. Had the wind and thunder gods been painted on 6 panels instead of 4, several problems occur. First of all, there would be 2 completely empty panels, which breaks the dramatic tension between the 2 figures, since they now appear stationary instead of rushing toward each other. And since the panels on a 6-panel screen are narrower, both gods now have a hinge running down their faces. I'm sure that Korin, at least mentally, imagined if red and white plum blossoms lent itself to a 6-panel layout before deciding for fewer panels. If red and white plum blossoms was painted on 6 panels, those vertical lines from the hinges would also cause a disturbance. Visible lines would disrupt the painting because the greatest tension comes from inserting an artificial void between the 2 freestanding screens. Like Sotatsu, Korin puts his protagonists on separate 2-panel screens. Corin's stroke of genius was the bold decision to divide the water down the middle, which instead of rupturing it, heightens the water's force. Splitting landscapes onto two screens was common practice. Splitting water was unheard of. This risky move succeeds because Corin transforms the water into pattern. The break accentuates geometric rhythm. And like an actual river, the wider the space between the banks, the more powerful it becomes. Unfortunately, time has not been kind to Corin's masterpiece. While the mineral pigments Corin used for the trees are quite stable, the silver leaf Corin used for the water has tarnished over 3 centuries. Tragically, the biggest threat to Corin's depiction of water is moisture itself. Its insidious accomplice, oxidation, has caused what was once radiant silver to darken and lose its brilliance. The big question is, what did the painting look like when Corin created it 300 years ago? Everyone agrees that the silver was shiny, but to properly answer the question, we need to know how Corin created the dark flowing areas. And this question has baffled art historians for decades. When you look closely at the dark areas, it's clear they aren't painted on. The color is extremely uniform, and there are no brushstrokes whatsoever. Remember the Ogata family business that sold textiles? The theory used to be that Corin's knowledge of fabric dyeing inspired him to use rice paste to shape the water outlines and then let dark ink cover the exposed areas, similar to resist dyeing methods used on silk. However, this theory is problematic since you need stencils to create such patterns, and stencils can't capture the fluid organic movement visible in Corin's water. This theory was challenged in 2011 when researchers at Tokyo University analyzed the black area's chemical composition to establish once and for all if Corin used a magic brush or a magic wand. And boy, were they surprised at the results. They even ran the test twice to be sure. There is no paint whatsoever, no ink, no pigments applied on top of the silver foil. So what is it? The dark areas tested for silver sulfide, confirming that everything black was not ink, rather resulted entirely from a chemical reaction, silver reacting with sulfur. This makes perfect sense. If there's anywhere in the world you can practically go next door for sulfur, it's Japan, with its tens of thousands of hot springs. Knowing what happened chemically still didn't explain how Corin controlled the process. Enter Tomoki Moriyama, an artist and researcher, and the one person who could do what none of the scientists could do: paint. Studying the original painting up close, Moriyama noticed something others had missed. He detected faint lines along the silver curves. These looked like traces of brush strokes. This suggested Corin had painted something transparent onto the silver, and the repeated strokes meant that he had reapplied the same line multiple times. Previous scholars had assumed Corin used a paste to prevent the silver from darkening, but these brush marks meant that Corin applied a liquid as a resist and not as a paste. Moriyama had a strong idea what the recipe for the liquid resist was. However, some experimentation with sulfur was necessary to determine the best method to darken the silver foil. The process took months, not to mention a lot of patience, but he eventually identified the method he believed Corin used. He then set out to create a full-size recreation of the screens. First, he applied silver leaf across the paper, laying down the shape of the water. Then he painted flowing lines where he didn't want the silver to darken using dosa, a traditional glue-based resist made from deer hide and aluminum mixed with water. After the resist dried completely, he sprinkled sulfur over the entire silver surface and waited for it to react with the exposed silver areas. What happened was nothing less than extraordinary. The unprotected areas darkened, as expected, but some turned iridescent. Others briefly shimmered blue, like ultramarine. These colors were not pigments. They were organic reactions, byproducts of sulfur reacting with silver at different stages. The only thing painted on was the dosa to protect the integrity of the labyrinth of silver lines. The rest was chemistry. When you think about it, the rice paste theory was fundamentally at odds with Corin's mastery as a painter. As Moriyama pointed out, only by painting with a brush can one capture the momentum of flowing water. This momentum is the life of Oriental painting. The brush shapes light, just as our voice shapes sound. It's ironic that Corin created such iconic beauty with sulfur. Fresh sulfur coming out of the earth is more an assault than a scent. Sharp, acrid like rotten eggs mixed with burnt matches. Nothing could be further from sulfur than the scent of plum blossoms. And unlike most flowers, they release their sweetest fragrance not during the day, rather at dusk. As the air cools, their scent sharpens. It's less floral than cherry blossoms. It's more honeyed, spicy. It's intoxicating. The Japanese even have a word for the smell of plum blossoms floating out of nowhere in the darkness. Anko. Might Korin be depicting plum blossoms at night when their scent is at its strongest? Is the dark water set aglow by swirling silver ripples reflecting the light of the moon? Plum blossoms under the moon, especially with lingering snow, carry profound emotional weight. It is a scene both magical and meaningful, celebrated in countless Japanese poems and paintings. I hadn't considered this nocturnal aspect of the painting until I saw Moriyama's recreation, where the untarnished silver leaf gleams brightly, just as it would have when Korin first created it. The untarnished gold leaf, too, leaps off the screen. Too much, you might say? But keep in mind, the world was a much darker place before electricity transformed the very fabric of human life. After sundown, golden folding screens were illuminated only by candles and lanterns. Their colors emerged not in brilliance, but in a dreamy luster, reflecting the soft flickering light of the gold. Only viewing the painting as a daytime scene, or without consideration of time for that matter, seems too banal. Night, with its soft uncertainties, is the perfect setting for a psychological journey. Under the moon, with stars like scattered blossoms, our vision fades, but scent intensifies. Red and white plum blossoms has suffered the ravages of time, but no one would ever think to restore it. Therein lies a big difference between Japanese and Western norms. When it comes to artworks, Western museums never ever display unrestored paintings. Cracked paint or darkened varnish are the limits of what is deemed acceptable for public display. In Japan, there's a cultural attitude of accepting things as they are in their current state, even if they have darkened or deteriorated over time. Moreover, there's the way of thinking that if such change is inevitable, then that too is something wonderful. This is especially true for folding screens, as they often incorporate materials like gold or silver leaf, which are susceptible to oxidation. For that reason, few screens today look as they did when they were made. Restoration is rare, and even then it's often limited to structural stabilization rather than cosmetic repair. In this sense, a Japanese folding screen is like a Stradivarius violin. The scratches and discoloration chronicle its journey. Its time-worn patina testifies to its history. Were one to cosmetically refinish it, it would erase the authenticity and nullify its reverence. The tarnish is not a flaw, but a layer of time. Age is not damage, it is transformation. It reflects deeper cultural ideas about permanence, decay, and what it means for an artwork to endure. As with the temple bell weathered by centuries of rain, the surface of the folding screen is a surface of memory.